Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Educated Colin Snap channel. How you doing? So today, Secondary just released a new patch notes. It's also a new season. I probably need to get on talking about Dagon as well, but we want to talk about the patch notes for this video. It has a couple interesting changes. I will say most of the updates are not that relevant, which I think is fine because we just had a pretty influential update very recently. So this one really only has one or two major balance changes that you're going to feel, but they are pretty impactful, the things that are changing. So let's get into it. So here we do have the patch notes. There was a recent, what's it called, roadmap, and some of the things talked about in the roadmap are being updated here. So we have the multi upgrade feature, so we can now speed upgrade, quality of life, not a big deal. Next up, we have the upgrade with gold. Now we can see, I actually haven't looked at what the numbers are, but my guess is it's not better than just saving your gold and using your gold in other things. So I wouldn't really recommend it. If the numbers are very positive, then I'll make a video updating. But for now, I would say don't use that feature most likely. Improve avatar selection flow lets you change your avatars quickly. That's nice because right now the avatar feature isn't super necessary. A lot of people run the basic. And then when you view an upgraded card and choose not to upgrade, it will be marked as red. So this is probably some players' favorite change here, where they just do not like seeing the red dot on every upgradable card, and it annoys them. And now you can just click on the card and move it, keep moving it, and then get rid of it completely. So you can have that removed. I don't think that's going to work with collections and stuff like that, but this is a great feature for some players. Now let's look at some of the card updates. So Cable now draws from the top card of your opponent's deck instead of the bottom. So this used to be fine, but because of Chavez, you would always get Chavez, which is more, in a lot of cases, a buff to your opponent. So it just was very weird. It's very hard to really play Cable in most decks because you always had that chance to draw Chavez, and it's like, this isn't very good for me. So this now draws from the top, which just helps a lot of your plays with Cable. It doesn't feel as bad, and maybe we'll see more Cable because right now Cable just not played. There's a lot of replacements, especially with Mirage now. So it was not really standing by itself, but I do think this helps it. I don't think this means you'll play Cable now, but it's something nice that Cable needed. So I'm happy to see it. Next up, we have the Magik Change. So this one also, I think, just makes a lot of sense, mostly because there was some scenarios where Magik could be dropped on turn 6 and trigger, and that's just too toxic of a situation to allow in the game, because a lot of players are expecting the game to end in turn 6, so they're revealing everything. Their game plan is designed around ending on turn 6, and if you can hide a Magik, in some scenarios where it can come out on turn 6, then you can follow up, and you could do that consistently, which you could, and you can follow up with like counterplay. It's just too polarizing of something to allow in the game. So I'm happy to allow it to be played on turn 6 as well, but now it just doesn't trigger the limbo effect. So this also helps because now you're not locked into playing Magik on turn 6. So this is pretty good for Silver Surfer decks that sometimes Magic's your top deck and you want a combo and you can't play it. Like, that just feels really bad. So I think this helps a lot. Silver Surfers decks, I think, are happy with this change. It's not like they were abusing mechanics to play it early anyway, so, or play it late anyway. So I think this is a good change as well. So 2 check marks. Next up is another check mark. Mr. Negative is getting a quality of life buff. So now it is capping the cost at 6 minimum. So not a text change, but this really is this is going to affect people that are playing Jane Foster. I think that's the most important distinction here, where normally if you swap and you draw Jane Foster, it costs 8 base, which is unplayable. but now it's only going to cost 6 space, which is still unplayable, but it's more options. And a lot of times, with Mr. Negative decks, your other cards cost 0. So even if you're getting like an extra 5 power, that's meaningful. So it is a meaningful change. So I do like this. For Mr. Negative decks, I do play some negative, so I I might see the effects of this. Jane Foster is the one that jumps out to me, but there's other stuff that can be impactful. It's just that most players, if they're playing negative, are going to feel this. They're going to feel this with Jane Foster. So thumbs up. This is a good change as well. I think the way it was before is kind of not great. There are some scenarios where you can get screwed. So I'm fine with this. Next up, we have Rogue. So Rogue is getting an ongoing, is going to be able to steal the on reveals now as well as the ongoing. So once again, I'm happy with all these changes. I think this is helpful. A lot of the on reveals are pretty beneficial. So, things like Electro and stuff like that, you just get the on reveal as well. So this just helps in that scenario. So pretty good. Mystique got it last patch, and now Rogue is getting it. So I'm happy with this as well. So all these changes, there's really not a meaningful downside in my opinion. I think these are all good changes. And then next up we have Spider-Man. So this is the big one. This is the one that matters a lot. This is the one people are going to talk about. This is the one people are going to have opinions about, really. So Spider-Man used to be a 4-4 or 4-3. Then they got updated to a 5-4 with the same ability. Now it's being changed to a 3-5. So one thing I was suggesting before was if you were going to keep this, like, I do think its old ability is too toxic. The ability to lock down a location, there's no counterplay, very hard, breaks the game if you have Galactus and some other scenarios where there's a lot of lockdown. A lot of times as well, one location will be a lockdown, and then you can maybe storm the other location, and then you'll have Spider-Man for the third location lockdown. It's just like, there's nothing I could do, right? So I do think that card itself was too problematic and caused a lot of issues. So I'm okay seeing a change. The change has to make sense, has to feel balanced. So let's talk about their discussions. The previous Spider-Man was a polarizing card, preventing opponent from playing cards. A frustrating experience is the most popular following wave into Galactus or lockdown decks, which are true, which are both decks use a combination of card to reduce the total play space. Yeah, we want some of that. The game needs a variety of strategies, but we don't want those decks or even some to be the best in the game. Our best cards should be cool and awesome. And it's awesome, Spider-Man. You know what card people like? Spider-Man. You know what card people want to buy variants of? Spider-Man. That's right. That's what they're saying. There is an irreconcilable dissonance in having one of the most popular cards in the Marvel canon attached to an effect we don't want to be popular. It's true. We've also added more Spider-Verse to the game. People seem to enjoy the movement of the cards, so we're making it more movement ability, which I think is fair. Will we return the old ability on a new card? Maybe, but for now, let's go with no. Okay. It's been not adding much fun. We don't see this kind of rework lightly, so we're happy to see the feedback. Yeah, I don't know when's the last time they reworked a card like this. Probably like Leader is the one that comes to mind, kind of, right? Because Leader used to play all the cards. Now it only plays the highest power, so that's a pretty big power ability change. So yeah, I will say, like, I do understand where they're coming from. So the rationale makes sense. Let's talk about the ability. So now it's a 3-5 on reveal. Move to another location and pull an enemy card from here to there. So your opponent has a card here, and you play your Spider-Man here. It's going to move to a random location, but then also move your opponent's card to a random location. Now there's a couple of things that jump to mind. First of all, this is a move card for now, which I think makes sense because all the Spider-Man cards are move cards except for Spider-Man itself, which is very weird. The card this most reminds me of is Polaris, right? So it has the same stat line as Polaris. but now you can move more targets than a one or two, but you don't get to control where the Polaris ends up. I mean, the Spider-Man ends up. So Polaris, you basically you get to choose. Hey, you're moving a card here. Now Spider-Man is, hey, I'm moving this card. I just don't know where. Um, Pretty interesting with Craven and stuff like that. But the downside is that it is pretty random, so you're not going to get to guarantee the Craven buff there, right? Like you're not going to be like, oh, I'll play Craven in the middle and I'll Spider-Man the right lane or move to the left. That's not guaranteed. So there's that riskiness, but it is very similar to Polaris. And it also has some use cases where it can move to a location that's hard to get to, right? So it can move to difficult to move locations, and it can also mess with your opponent, right? Like you can move Angela somewhere that's annoying. You can move random. There are some like real effective use cases of it, so I do think that's pretty cool. But it is mostly reminding me of Polaris. Now, I will say there's definitely some that meta decks right now that will definitely be affected by this, right? I think Thanos Control probably the most affected. That one really used Spider-Man to its efficiency. Regular control decks as well, High Evolution and regular control also used Spider-Man pretty effectively. And then the last one I would say is Silver Surfer decks also. We're now running Professor X Spider-Man instead of Sarah, which used to be the standard. Now they were running some lockdown because they figured out it was pretty powerful to just lock down a lane and then have the Silver Surfer like win the other lane with all the tempo it can provide. So that was those things I think will be affected. Silver Surfer in particular, though, while you could argue did get nerfed with the change, also got a new tool to work with, right? So it's another Polaris, which I think is very meaningful in how you want to design the deck now. So you get another 3/5, which is really good stat lines. You get some flexibility, you get some control on top, which Silver Surfer decks already have a ton of. But another thing to think about now is that the Spider-Man and Miles Morales combo is now easier to pull off. Miles Morales usually was reliant on Jeff and usually reliant on Polaris. Now you have Spider-Man as well. So now you have Spider-Man, Jeff, and Polaris to combo with, meaning that on turn 4, it can be very consistent to play a 1-mana Miles Morales and the 3-drop. So if you're playing Silver Surfer, this might be a very nice new tool that we now have for that particular deck list. So that's something to be thinking about here, where Miles Morales might be a lot more playable in a lot of random decks, because if you're playing Polaris, if you're playing Spider-Man, well, now you can just add Miles Morales. If you're playing Jeff, which a lot of times you do as well, you have this tool. So this is a pretty big change. Spider-Man is very playable and was being played a lot, so decks will have to adjust. And I do wonder what the future holds. I'm not even covering move decks in particular, maybe because I don't value move decks as much, but I do think move decks also like it, but I'm not as sold in how efficient it's going to be in a move deck compared to something like a Silver Surfer deck or any deck that's running Miles Morales, like the Stature Def decks. Those ones also could use Spider-Man. Pretty interesting. So I do, overall, when we talk about this card, I think it's a good change. I just don't know if it's like distinct enough. I wonder if it's just going to feel like another Polaris or if it's going to shine on its own. I do think the Miles Morales synergy just thematically makes sense, but it's hard to know for sure, right? Like that's what we do, right? We guess what cards are going to be good and how playable they are. And I do have some ideas, especially Silver Surfer is the one jumping out to me as being like really playable. But it is an interesting change, and I'm excited to see how it grows from here. So we're definitely covering a lot of Spider-Man. Now the last one is the Evolve the Thing. So this is a pretty meaningful nerf here. So usually they're thinking high evolutionary is in a fine spot, but they think that the thing is actually outperforming Cyclops, which is believable because it's a 4/9, right? It's a 4/9 that can work with Jeff, so become a 3/9. Like that's really crazy stats. There's no downside. So you can target one card 3 times. Like it's very strong. So they've changed it where you have to hit 3 different enemies. So you can't target the same card 3 times. You have to hit 3 different enemies, which is a very meaningful change, right? It means that the baseline goes from a 4/9 to probably a 4/7 baseline. You're most likely going to have 1 in a lot of cases. 2 is if you're lucky or if you're in a good spot, but 1 is very common. So pretty big nerf to the thing, honestly. It's a slight buff to Abomination, but I don't see it. I don't see that being relevant in a lot of cases compared to the how big of a nerf it feels. So there wasn't like too much high evolutionary I was seeing. I was seeing some, but it wasn't like crazy. So maybe this will move it down a little bit more in priority as well. So definitely some interesting changes, and then we have some bug fixes, performance improvements, and then there's some known issue list. But overall, I do think this is a good patch. Like the first 4 I think are just good. Like there's really, I don't really have any downsides with these: Cable, Magic, Mr. Rogue. Spider-Man is interesting, so I don't know if it's good or bad. I do think it's an interesting one. And then the thing I think is fine if they're thinking that the stats for high evolutionary is still too high, which has to be the argument here. Then the evolve thing isn't crazy. You're not gonna cause an uproar, but it's still gonna be a meaningful nerf. So overall, pretty cool. I do think there was already a lot of changes in the last patch. So I don't want them to like, here's a whole new meta right after a season starts. I think that's a bit much. So just the Spider-Man change, I think, is something they've been working on. So this is something they seem happy about. So we'll have to see how it feels. But overall, those are the changes. What are your thoughts? Hope you guys like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. I've been like looking through Baldur's Gate. If you're like wondering where's Collins, that's why. I mean, it seems very well done, and hope you guys enjoy your time, and I'll see you.
Educated Collins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow, snap. Your skills will be improved.